Welcome back, I'm Ryan from Bluewood Gaming, and nearly a year ago, I answered the question of whether or not it was worth it to play Elder Scrolls Online in 2017. If you haven't seen that video, I'm going to leave a link to it in the description, but here I am a year later giving my thoughts on the Morrowind expansion for Elder Scrolls Online. Now, before we get into this, I'm not going to be giving any spoilers, so you are going to be seeing cuts in this video, where I cut out dialogue and other stuff like that. So, let's get right on to my thoughts of Morrowind. Let's start from the beginning. If you roll a new character, you will be immediately brought to Morrowind, or more specifically Vardenfell, and you will start off your new character not going through any of the starting quests that you would if you had started a character before Morrowind came out. And, well, I think it does an okay job for people that have already played. I could see this being much worse of a start if you haven't played ESO before. So, I think that they should have made it so that you start in your regular spot and then you can go to Vardenfell, but this is how they did it, and from starting at level 0 and leveling up through my time playing, I was able to get to level 17 by the time that I finished my playthrough of Morrowind. Now, moving on in a somewhat different direction, I'm going to talk about the geography of Morrowind itself, since we have had a full-fledged Elder Scrolls game based around Morrowind. And the simplest way that I can put this is pretty much everything is in the correct place that it was in Elder Scrolls 3, but everything is shrunk down. The best way to kind of show this off is for anybody that's played Elder Scrolls 3, starting in the beginning city, Sita Neen, I believe it's pronounced. Walking from there to Vivec City takes a few minutes. It's not just a leisurely stroll down the coast. You actually have to go a little bit. In Elder Scrolls Online, you can get from Sita Neen to Vivec City in like a minute and a half. Like, it's a very short walk. And so you can really tell that everything's condensed down, and it's not nearly as big as the Elder Scrolls 3 map was. Granted, like I said, everything is still there, so all your main towns and cities and everything is still there, and each of the cities themselves are still roughly the same size as they were in Elder Scrolls 3. It's just the areas in between the cities seems to be scaled down. Now, to give you a comparison of what size Vardenfell is compared to some of the others in Elder Scrolls Online, it is roughly 20% larger than Hrothgar, and if math is correct, it's roughly 27% larger than Craglorn. So that kind of gives you some comparisons to other areas. It's still a very large area in the Elder Scrolls Online, but it's not as large as it was in Elder Scrolls 3. Now, the last thing I'll say about the geography is something very subjective, but something that I noticed right away, and when talking with other people, a few of them noticed it too. And that is, when playing the Elder Scrolls 3, the world felt very alien as you went through it, and it didn't feel like another Elder Scrolls game, even the ones coming after it in Oblivion and Skyrim. But you don't get that same feeling here in ESO. In fact, about 75% of the area of Vardenfell reminded me of, like, the middle of Glenumbra, which is nowhere near as alien as it felt in the Elder Scrolls 3. Like I said, it's a very subjective thing, but it is kind of a tone difference that you can tell if you, like, look for it. Now let's move on to arguably the most important thing in Morrowind, and that is the quests and the storylines. Now, I'm actually a bit conflicted on this front, because the storylines themselves are actually some of the best storylines that I've played in an Elder Scrolls game to date. Each city in Morrowind has its own specific quest chain, and the storylines in them are amazing. It's everything from helping a Batman-like vigilante to even joining a Dark Brotherhood-like group. And I'm not going to go into too much detail beyond that, but these are really engaging side quests, and the main quests themselves are also really great. And I got really brought into that story as well. But for the quests themselves, too many of them, for my liking, kind of fell into this repetition of go to a place, talk to a person. Go somewhere else, talk to a person. You might fight one or two enemies in between there, besides just the random enemies thrown out around Vardenfell, but the amount of quests that is literally just the objective is go to a place and talk to a person is a bit too high for my liking. But I've got to say, the quests could be a lot worse, and I would still happily play through them just because of how good the storylines are in this. Now, I don't want to start talking about spoilers, so I'm going to move away from talking about the quests and start going into my final thoughts and whether I think it's worth it to pick up the Morrowind expansion at this point in time. Now, personally, I think that this expansion starts off on a kind of slow burn, mostly from starting a brand new character and having them immediately thrown into Morrowind. Like I said earlier, I think that it would have been more beneficial to start a character in their regular starting place and then give them the option to go to Vardenfell, because it just leads to this slow burn at the very beginning, and it feels like everything is just moving along so slowly, and then once you get about halfway through it, or between halfway and 3/4 of the way through it, stuff starts picking up, and then by the time you know it, it's over. Like I said, it took me 20 hours to get through this, but I've seen people give the estimate of about 35 if you want to complete everything. All I did was do the main quests, and then I did every single side quest that I came across, but I didn't go out of my way to look for side quests or do dungeons or anything like that. The next thing that I slightly don't like is that once you finish all the quests and whatnot in Vardenfell, there's really no reason to come back, because everything that you can do in Vardenfell, you can do somewhere else. And because of that, there's no real reason to keep coming back to Vardenfell once you've finished it. But like I said earlier, the storylines in this are some of the best that I've played in an Elder Scrolls game ever, and that was really my driving force for playing through this. Now, let's move on to whether or not I think that you should get this. Now, I think that there's going to be several different categories of people looking at potentially buying this, and they have slightly different answers, which is why I'm bringing it up. If you've never played Elder Scrolls Online before, you can actually get it on Steam with the Morrowind chapter included for $30, which I don't see why you wouldn't get that, because this is just 20 hours of more content for, like, next to nothing when you bundle it together with ESO for $30. The next grouping of people is the people that already have ESO but don't have Morrowind and want to play it kind of for the story and actually get involved in it. For that, it's $20 on Steam or your regional equivalent, and it's definitely worth it for that. I think that the storylines, like I said multiple times, are amazing, and that I think $20 for having 20 to 35 hours of content and going through and having these great stories, that's going to be worth it. Now, the third type of person is the person that already has ESO, is looking at Morrowind, but doesn't really care too much about the story. And that's the person I don't really recommend buying this for, because there's not really much that Morrowind brings on its own besides these great stories that you're not really going to be able to get somewhere else in ESO. And I would save the money that you would spend on the Morrowind upgrade and potentially spend that on some other DLC that ESO has that might give you something a bit more tangible in-game besides just a new area, a new house, and some new quests. Granted, there are what I would consider some really good armor sets in this, but I don't think that you want to pay $20 just to farm and try to get new armor sets. So, that is going to be it for this video. I hope I answered everybody's questions that they might have had about ESO Morrowind Chapter. If you have any more, just leave them in the comments and I will answer them. As always, I'm Ryan from Bluewood Gaming, and I'll see you guys in the next one.